Welcome to my house. I'm Susan Moorehead, and I'm glad you're here. I want to show you my folk art collection that I've been collecting since the early 70s. And I'm going to start with this bird, which is from the West Texas area of Plainview and Lubbock. It's made of a shovel and bicycle parts, and it's one of my early pieces of folk art. I have another one that guards the back door. I've been collecting huipiles, which are a Mexican and Guatemalan blouse in a way, woven with a lot of decoration, and the decoration is usually very definitive about what village or town it's from. And I have a number of them. This one happened to be one that wasn't sewn up down the sides, so I put it on the wall because I really loved it. These are both sets of puppets that I found in India in 1995 on a trip there over the Christmas of 95 and 96, in a wonderful trip there. And then coming around, I've been collecting churches when I found them. They don't really have a pride of authorship because you find a church and you don't know who did it. But Josefina Aguilar of Ocotlan in Oaxaca is a potter, quite a famous potter, and this is one of the early nativity scenes of hers that I got. I got that one in Houston, as a matter of fact, in a little store called Surroundings. Teodora Blanco did these little musicians, 3 little tiny musicians sitting up there, and above is a Aaron Martinez tree of life that's a kind of a peacock. And I think he's known for the peacock tree of life that he does, with little sidebar tree of life pieces as well. And then this wonderful band, and I'm not sure I can tell you where that's from, but I've had it since the 70s. That's pretty much, except for this and its companion, this, which are from Ken Edwards' Tonala from the 60s. And they were a wedding present to me in the 60s. So in the 80s, I collected a lot of the Last Supper pieces from Okumicho. And some are done by the same artist, but most of them are slightly different. I found one of the most amazing things about them is they all have watermelon in them, and I'm not really clear why that's the case. But I think they're absolutely wonderful. And these 2 side pieces are from Okumicho, as well as the little nativity scene. In addition to those, there are these 4 female figures who are done by various members of the Aguilar family. This is Josefina Aguilar. This one is Irene Aguilar. I think this one is possibly Josefina. It's a portrait of Frida Kahlo that I found in Guadalajara and gave to my mother, but I got it back after she passed away. And this one's not signed, but it's very clearly one of the Aguilar sisters as well. So here's another Okumicho Last Supper, but I want to particularly show you this Okumicho piece by a person whose name I don't know, but it combines some of the more interesting religious aspects of the contact period. We have the crucifix on an altarpiece at the back, but dancing in attendance are reindeer, or deer, not necessarily reindeer, but are deer who are spiritual elements in Mesoamerican religious and mythology. But they're playing maracas and they're dressed in polka-dotted flounced outfits, which I think is a wonderful combination of religious spirit from both before the conquest and after. Up here is a piece of glass that was a friend, Malene McCullough, collected in Mexico from an earlier period than now. I'm not sure how old it is, but she gave it to me as a treat. And another tree of life, and more of these figures that I can't tell you where they're from. But here is a huipil from Oaxaca. I saw lots of women wearing these the first time I visited there in the late 80s. This, which I love, is a painting from a faculty show from the University of Texas in the 50s that my grandmother collected. And I thought it was so in keeping with the spirit of all of this Mexican religious Virgin and Jesus art that's around us that I like to hang it here. And this is a particularly nice piece, I think, of the kind of work that's done with overpainting and then carving back out to make the design. Also Mexico. And then I have some Mexican pieces that I bought in a street antique show in Guadalajara, because I visited there a number of times. So I've put a portion of my collection of huipiles around the table, dressed the chairs with them so you can see what they look like. This one is probably the best one in the collection. It's needle pointed as opposed to being embroidered. It has two sides, floral on two sides, and I think it's just one of the more beautiful ones I've ever seen. There are a number of others. As you know, they each come from their own separate village. They're tied to the traditions of that village, and all the women in each village wear the identical huipils, different only because they've made them themselves, or their mothers made them, or their grandmothers made them. There's a wedding huipil here. The one at the far end with the yellow is from Antigua, Guatemala. Most of these are Guatemalan, although Mexican villages also have a tradition of huipiles that match from the locale. The airplane, give you a good shot of the airplane, is made from a gourd. And I've had a fleet of airplanes, but the paint popped off of a number of them. This one is still pretty much intact. I really rather like the floral on the airplane, but it's a folk toy. In Michoacan, they make these beautiful green glazed jars and jugs that are called piñas, I think because they have all sorts of little pineapple-y shaped pieces on them. And one graces the cover of this extraordinary book of folk art called Great Masters, that's from the collection of Banamex. And although I don't have one just like this, I do have this one from the 50s. This one, which was a wonderful gift to me that I just love. The lid comes off of it, and it's not a usable piece. It's really a decorative piece because all of these calla lilies have holes that their stems fit through into the body of the jar. And then this wonderful one down at the end, which is for drinking hot chocolate with the cups attached. And I found it at a wonderful show and sale at Mexicarte one year. So those are the three Michoacan pieces. The roosters I found in San Miguel, I loved them. These roosters I bought in the mid-60s on Guam when I was visiting my father, my parents, who were out there in the military during the Vietnam War, fighting cocks from probably Thailand, I'm imagining. And then this is, my friend Richard Seegers did this beautiful painting of pears in which each pair was a friend or a loved one of his. Once upon a time, we all knew who we were, but I'm not sure anymore. At the far end, on the top, is an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe that I found in an antique store in Guadalajara. And the antique dealer told me it was 18th century and painted on a canvas made of cactus strands, which is a pretty extraordinary piece. I've seen blankets made of cactus, I've seen other things made of it, but I've not yet seen a canvas made of it. And it's in a traditional metal frame. Below it is a kind of a folk art piece by my friend Malene McCullough, which I also love. This is my collection of images of the Virgin, and many of them are images of the Virgin of Guadalupe, who is particularly Mexican, but several are other things. The large one in black back here is the image of the Virgin Soledad, and she's from Oaxaca, from the black clay in Oaxaca. This one with this wonderful corona of, or aura of light coming out from around her is the Virgin of Guadalupe. This one is from New Mexico by Sabatina Lopez Ortiz, a folk artist there, who also did this lovely little piece with a tiny animal coming out of the hole in the bark. And Chris Ortiz did this little bull that goes with it. Concepcion Aguilar did this lovely one of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And this is not the Virgin of Guadalupe, but this wonderful headdressed man standing atop a tower of angels whose tiny wings stick out in various places, is by Ventura Fabian, who did several other pieces in my collection. And I'd like to, and this is from Ecuador, a little nativity scene from Ecuador. Peru, over there. And this is a piece by a friend of mine who started as an architect and decided he wanted to be a teacher of art. And so one of his projects was to do a lithograph in 17 passes through the lithography machine or press. And he gave me this as a treat for having advised him about what to do, and I really like it a lot. His name is Greg Thomas. The other piece over here that might be of some interest is this beautiful woven belt that has tiny designs all the way along its length. And I think it's a fairly rare find. So this angel is from Ocotlan in Oaxaca, from the family of Jimenez Ortiz. And it's finely painted and quite beautiful, this little angel. And then there are these multiples that I found in Tlaquepaque on shelves that were filled, shelf after shelf, with these in all their different colored iterations. And I brought it home too, just so I'd have a recollection that it's not just a one-off. It comes as part of a large group. This little beautiful thing is by Angelica Vasquez from Oaxaca. And she has people working with her, and a young woman made this piece with all the jars and this beautiful little heart in the two-colored clay. And there are some more Angelica Vasquez in another room that we'll see. Over the years, I've been collecting various sorts of dishware from Mexico. Probably I fell in love with the Ken Edwards work from Tonalá when I was in college at the University of Texas in the early 60s, and the Cadeau had it for sale. It was always out of my price range, but my mother collected it as well. And so I have a number of pieces that she collected and I inherited, and then other pieces of it that I bought for myself. So that's the Ken Edwards Tonalá. In addition, there have been a number of other various pieces, plates, small plates with bowls that are Xochiquetzal that I found in the folk art store in Guadalajara. And these are Tonalá as well, called Bernabé. I have a set of bowls of those. And then I have these beautiful platters, plus the cream and sugar, that are also from Tonalá or Tlaquepaque in that general area. Plus these, and a jug that my mother collected, and a whole set of glasses that are quite interesting and not great fun to drink out of, to be perfectly honest. Well, these are two dinner table settings, one from Kenya that's set with animals all around the table and they're having their drinks. The lion has pride of place with a handle on his mug and the bottle that sits in the center of the table. The other is from Oaxaca area of Mexico, and it's by Ventura Fabian Martinez. And it has a large group of men and women. The men are all wearing their hats. They're all sitting in their chairs around the Corona table. There's a musician playing his guitar and a couple dancing. So I think that the kitchen is the perfect place for these two sets of diners. This beautiful virgin from Pátzcuaro area in Michoacán is a kitchen virgin. She is the one who presides over things in the kitchen, and I bought her in the 70s for my mother, and she was in my mother's kitchen for many years until I inherited her. This chicken I bought, believe it or not, I bought in New York City at a folk art store, but it was made in Africa out of recycled plastic bags. Pretty cute chicken. Then, in addition, I have two beautiful woodcuts by David Everett, sepia-ish toned and quite nice. And then I have these two bark paintings on bark paper by Roberto Venancio that I bought also in the 70s. They're wonderful scenes of Mexico. This one has a bull ring. This one has a cemetery, but there are other things going on, a field in the middle with the corn growing, the milpa. The bark paintings always tell wonderful stories, and I have as many as I can hang in my house, but these are two particularly good ones. My parents were stationed on Guam in the mid-60s during the Vietnam War, and my dad was with part of the 2nd Air Force. And there were a lot of trips made back and forth by various people who flew all those missions to Vietnam, where there was an elephant manufacturing factory in Saigon. And before it was all said and done, my mother had a herd of 17 elephants, of which I now have 3. The factory eventually was bombed by I don't know who, and they still make elephants of some sort, but not the same quality that we were getting back then. I was lucky enough to inherit not just one elephant, but the pair for the coffee table. On the coffee table, first I'll show you this wonderful wooden painted animal by Edilberto Cortés. And generally speaking, these animals are from the area of Oaxaca. They're from several small towns there. They're made of copal wood, and they're often a family production with one person doing the carving and other people doing the painting. But I think this one's quite wonderful. Here's another animal, this one by Seni Fuentes, who is from San Martin Tilcajete, and it's also copal and painted in a family tradition. Not so Mexican are two other pieces on this table. This glass fish is made from recycled Coca-Cola bottles, and it came from Guam. And these flowers were made by the Maasai, and I picked them up in Nairobi at the Maasai market. They're beaded flowers. Now, we'll move to, this is an original piece of folk art in my collection. It was from the early 70s, and I bought it in San Miguel de Allende. It's by Candelario Medrano, who was from Guadalajara. And I have a number of other pieces of his, all of which are lined up along the fireplace down here. I have a church and an apartment building, and who knows what this is, perhaps another church. A train that I think was probably done by his grandchildren, and various and sundry other pieces, including this beautiful little truck, which I just love, that has people in it, and that figures in the painting of my grandchildren. The 3 little cherubs playing music that surround the Candelario Medrano Church are by one of the Aguilar sisters, in this case Guillerma Aguilar from Ocotlan in Oaxaca. This beautiful little thing came from a trip that I made with Mita and Trent to Morocco, and it comes apart, which is quite lovely of it. This is a baobab tree from Kenya. Beautiful little thing. I have a taxi from Havana, Cuba. I have an airplane from Mexico. Another bus from Mexico with a man on the top eating a piece of watermelon. I have Cuban recycled beer can car and camera in the corner back here. Another church and another sun. There are a number of sun faces in the collection. There are some animals that my great-grandson is feeding from a little dish down here. These are Kenyan animals, children's toys. And this piece in the windowsill, which has a lot of friends, came from a little town in Mexico where the bark of a tree is carved into various houses and castles and assorted buildings. And the town is Tepoztlan. I bought it in the market. This little collection are all banks. They're all from different parts of Mexico. You might notice that there's some fish over here. I like fish a lot. And the yellow fish sitting up here is a recycled tin can that was made in Kenya. All along the window ledges up here are bronze pieces. They're all native Texas animals, birds, fish, amphibians, done by David Everett, who's a good friend. Here's another Ocamillo piece, this one on horseback, that's considerably older than the other pieces. I got it many, many years ago in the 70s, I think. Well, 10 years before those other ones, but it has been hiding from me for a while, and I pulled it back out the other day because I thought its color scheme went nicely with the little scene that I've recreated when I got the furniture and a number of artifacts from my parents' house about 1.5 years ago. And I set it up the way my mother had it set up, only instead of having her great-grandfather's portrait in between the candlesticks and the jade trees from Southeast Asia and the jade fruit from Southeast Asia, I put my young self as a small altar to my young self here. In front, you'll see one of a pair of very large jars that I found in San Miguel, I think about 15 years ago, and we happened to be driving in a large enough car to bring them home. And so they live here now. Have a lot of things on this wall. I've got a little frog by Efrain Fuentes, who is from San Martin Tilcajete, and Mario Castellanos did this beautiful lizard. And then we have the typical doll. I have one with my own name on it. A grandchild's piece. A beautiful piece of Huichol beadwork, this deer head. A collection of small, possibly pipes, because there's a hole in the back, of these indigenous people beating on drums or doing whatever they're doing with one leg extended and one leg bent. Or perhaps this is not a leg, it's hard to know, because sometimes the knees are up. Masks, 2 clay masks and one that's a mask of skin with a little fur around the edge of it. And then these 2 little pots and this nose pot were by my sister when she was finishing art school. Up here we have a doll with a gourd for a head and a wonderful man riding a bicycle who is undetermined about who did it. I don't know quite, but I had it for a long, long time. From San Martin Tilcajete is, I'm gonna pull it down, is this wonderful man on a bicycle by Martin Melchor. And he has a family in San Martin who have done a number of other pieces up here. I'm gonna actually jump to a couple of the other pieces first before we come back to here. Juventino Melchor did these 2 small deer and this one with the very long striped antlers, and this little rabbit. Now back over here, we have The Cart and the Donkey by Fernando Espinal of Arrazola, are part of his work, and then this dog and cat who are facing off with each other are by the same artist. So the band is by Martin Melchor. The alebrijes, which were invented by Pedro Linares in Mexico City early in the 20th century, but copied later by a lot of people in Oaxaca. Luis Sosa Calvo did those. This beautiful cactus filled with birds and these two fish are by Cuete Ramirez from San Martin Tilcajete. And then you can see I like fish a lot, and I have no attribution for these three fish, or this beautiful fish motifed plate, which is actually paper with glued on. And then this whole grouping is Josefina Aguilar, again, under a wonderful painting by a relative of my friends Penny and Nigel Sands-Lumsden, by Amy Sands-Lumsden, of women dancing in Kenya. This wonderful ram with the big curved horns is by Antonio Mandarin of Arrazola, which is also another small town in Oaxaca, in the Oaxaca area. So this little jaguar is one I just recently bought in a folk art store in Mexico City, and I believe he happens to be from Chiapas. He reminds me of another jaguar I've seen from Chiapas, so I think that that's who he is, but he's quite beautiful. These are very old retablos, they call them, that are actually personal prayers for a variety of different things, and some of them have dates. This one says 1974. They're hard to read in some cases, but they're very primitive. And this collection I found in a cardboard box in a hardware store in San Miguel in the 70s, San Miguel de Allende, and they were a quarter a piece at the time. So they're a real find. That's the way life changes. Okay, in this cabinet on the bottom we have a grouping of market ladies by Josefina Aguilar of Ocotlan, Oaxaca. She's pretty famous for her market ladies, but she's done a number of other things that you've seen already. She also did this wonderful scene of the Zocalo in Oaxaca, which has the bandstand with the band in it, the fountain in the front, the ice cream vendor with a child having ice cream, the acrobat, people kissing, reading, shoe shining, sitting, the balloon vendor with a child with balloons, and a few trees in the background. Next to it is another nativity, this by my granddaughter when she was 7. This little nativity is from Guadalajara, and here's another tiny, tiny Josefina Aguilar nativity. And then this market lady is by Guillermina Aguilar, the sister of Josefina. There are 4 Aguilar sisters, Irene, Concepcion, Josefina, and Guillermina. These pieces at the bottom are by Angelica Vasquez from Atzompa, which is a part of Oaxaca. And this is one she's quite famous for, a mermaid. Here is it's sort of an angel face, a cherub, I suppose. And then this one, that doesn't have the second color on it, is most unusual because it has 2 sides. This side has the Last Supper on the skirt, but the Madonna above. The other side has the 3 wise men coming, and the baby Jesus is back here behind this one with the Christ figure above. So it's kind of switched around, but pretty fascinating, I think. I visited her studio last year, and it's pretty wonderful. She lives right below the newly excavated ruins of Atzompa. which rival Monte Alban. Very exciting. So that's these. Oh, and here's a wonderful folk toy from this early 70s that was given to my son by his godmother when we were on a trip to Mexico together. These top two images are from India. I bought them in Rajasthan. And then this next one, these are painted on paper. This is not on paper. This is on some sort of bone. And it's a practice scene by Iranian students who are learning to make miniatures. And I bought this one in Iran on a trip there some years ago, 2004. And then this is a Hiroshige I bought in Japan when I was there on a student trip in 1996. Not a very big one, but a real one, so that's kind of a fun thing to have. On one of my earliest trips to Mexico, I discovered in the phone art store in Mexico City, I discovered the, I guess they're sort of like market ladies, done by Teodora Blanco of Oaxaca, that are about 4 or 5 inches tall. Many of them have animal faces, and they're holding baskets or vegetables or chickens under each arm, or who knows what. But and sometimes they're wearing hats, and sometimes they're doing something else. And they were just beautiful, and I couldn't leave them there. And they were very inexpensive back in the early 70s. And now they're quite priceless, and I love them. I think they're just wonderful. Well, my history is that I was born in Lubbock to a military father and a mother from Waco. And we moved to Germany after my second sister was born as part of the occupation. And I lived in a variety of places growing up, many different places, and came to school at the University of Texas for college because that's where my mother had come, her sisters, her mother, her mother's sisters. I was in a large group of family members who had come to the University of Texas. I lived with my grandmother, who had a boarding house for university girls, which was a fun way to do school, and I loved it. I married and moved away and moved back to Austin 5 years later, and have lived in this house for 46 years. I moved in 1971 in the early part. I got interested in Mexico from the very beginning, from the very first time, the first Thanksgiving at school when it was too far to go home. My family had moved to Savannah by then. It was too far to go home for Thanksgiving, and I was invited by Mary Maverick McMillan of San Antonio to join her family to go to Laredo. And I learned about the Cadillac Bar right off the bat, and we had a wonderful time. And I fell in love with Mexico, and I've never quit loving Mexico. But I didn't really study it until, as a grandmother, I went back to school to get a graduate degree in architectural history. And somehow or another, I had gotten to know Hal Box, who was the dean, and who was very interested in Mexico. And he and his assistant, Logan Wagner, from Mexico, who was also an architect, and had studied archaeology and was working on a PhD in Latin American studies. The two of them were doing an Earthwatch program, and Hal hired me to work on a grant for their Earthwatch program. They were documenting 16th century town centers in Mexico. And when I sat down to meet with them for the first time, I had heard of and could say Cuernavaca and Acapulco and Laredo and San Miguel de Allende, because I knew about that too. But I'd never heard Ixmiquilpan and Huaquechula and a few places like that, Tepoztlan and Teopanticuanitlan, and places that I somehow then learned all about. I focused my attention in graduate school on learning a lot about the intersection of Mesoamerica and the Spanish friars who came and built 400 churches in 70 years. Logan and Hal and I wrote a book that was published by the University of Texas Press called Ancient Origins of the Mexican Plaza. And its subtitle is From Primordial Sea to Public Space. And we used as our cover image one of the Relaciones Geográficas from the university's collection at the Benson Latin American Library that were created in the 16th century as part of the information sent back to the King of Spain about his holdings in the New World. This image shows Lake Atitlan as a primordial sea, and the mountains which were to become in the landscape of Mesoamerica the pyramids, where the sea became the plaza. And the whole transition from primordial sea to public space in plazas is documented in this book with a lot of examples. We had a wonderful time doing it.